5 more Blu-ray recommendations based on what I've been watching this week. Space movie, Viking movie, Taiwanese movie, have a true story, dystopian adaptation of a classic novel. Stick around. Welcome back to the channel. My name's Chris. This is my watch list, and this is what I've been watching recently in the world of boutique Blu-ray. 5 recommendations that I've got for you this week, and if you like this video and you get some good recommendations of this week, there are 40 odd other episodes this to watch. You can go back and check the watch list, which will appear at the end, and that'll link down below. But let's start off with an Imprint release. This is spine number 113, and it is Marooned. Marooned is a 1969 release of a film about going to space. And you'll probably realise that this is right around the time of the space race. We have a story here of a set of 3 astronauts who are marooned or left stranded, trying to return from space back home. Due to a fault or an error, they can't quite get home. As the story normally goes, Houston is solved with tackling this problem and getting these 3 men home. But is it even possible? A couple of big stars in this. Gregory Peck is the guy in charge of the operation in Houston, and Gene Hackman is here in an earlier role as one of the 3 astronauts stuck up in space. What I will say about Marooned is it's overly long, for sure. But it does a great job of actually making you believe that this actually happened, that it's a true life story. I mean, there have been a lot of these, obviously. Apollo 13, etc. are good examples of this kind of film. And this does a pretty good job, I think, of replicating that fear of dread of these guys have gone where no one has gone before. And they do that by kind of incorporating the human elements of their life. You have their families involved. They're the 3 wives of the 3 men are there to be there and help support, but also to show you the emotional impact that these men maybe never coming home will have on you. And, you know, for the time, I think this is a pretty good depiction of what it's like. Obviously a lot of model work, there's a lot of green screening, etc. But I think it's fairly believable. And like I said beforehand, you have a fairly convincing depiction of what could have happened. I really, really enjoyed it. Like I say, it's a bit overly long, but I think once you get past a certain stage and you realise we're on the push to see whether these men can get home, they're up against the clock, is everybody going to make it home? You've seen this kind of disaster movie before, and this is right before the precipice of the 70s disaster movie. I think it's interesting that this was released because I'd say around the time there would have been a lot of debate around the space program was still very much in vogue. It was still really going strong, and this would have been seen as a problematic release, I'm sure, around the time because of this idea that America mightn't get its sons home. I mean, we know certainly in war times that it's difficult enough without, you know, putting it straight in your face, and have a fairly big budget depiction on screen is something that's maybe not in the public interest, but we have something that is ultimately quite successful. One of the things that's interesting about this is that it's directed by John Sturges, and John Sturges' kind of output in and around this time is somewhat mixed, I think it's fair to say. I mean, some good, some bad. There is a featurette on John Sturges' career in this, which I really adored. There's also a little conversation with Kim Newman, which is also great. There's the artwork on the cover, and the artwork on the slip up close. There's also an audio commentary on here, which I haven't got round to watching yet. So a really full-featured disc, a good example of Imprint taking a film that is sort of maligned in some spaces, but has good and interesting value in terms of cinema appreciation, and especially historically around the time when it was released. You know, the context in which it was released. Now, I have another Imprint title coming up, but I thought I would jump to BFI and the recent release of 1984, a release of the translation of the George Orwell novel to screen. But this one isn't the film version. This is a TV adaptation from about 1952, 1954, something like that was screened on BBC. Stars Peter Cushing in the main role. It's kind of incredible, I think, for the time that's been done. Certainly on a technical level, it's a mixed bag. You have the things that are shot inside in a soundstage, the things that were filmed outside on film, and whenever they do the restorations of these kind of materials, you always see a very distinct difference when it comes to viewing it. That aside, you have what must have been an incredibly ambitious representation of the dystopian future of the story of 1984. And if those that don't know, 1984 depicts a future where Big Brother is watching every move. The corporation is in charge of the world, and people are being watched for what they can say, what they cannot say, and being censored for it in some way, shape or form. It's chilling because you can see definitely in the political world that we live in at the moment that there are various depictions of this right about now. This idea that you keep on telling people that things are improving, whether they're improving or not, but you back it up with statistics and people will go, God, this is great, the world is going great, even though all the other outside metrics show them that the world isn't going great at all. It must have been so brave at the time to portray it like this, because you'd not long after the war had finished, basically governments were having a free hand, I would say, to make changes, decide what they want to do or otherwise, and they didn't have to do this. Peter Cushing I think's great at it. There's a couple of other really fabulous performances, and I do think in general the performances are a real strength of it the whole way through. They got characters who fit type, they get the ideas and the worries of the characters very much front line and centre, so that you as the viewer could make your own judgment on what's going on here. And a lot of the extras that are on this disc focus on time period that it was released in, the kind of reaction to it at the time, how there was, it was equally celebrated and not, or otherwise. And it's a really fascinating disc. It is one that I rented, but that I do intend to pick up, because I think 1984, this depiction of 1984, without the glitz and glamour and in black and white, is incredibly successful in depicting what was really at stake. And it even has a wonderful interval break with this sort of oppressive patriotic music in it that normally I would have fast forwarded through, but it was sort of fascinating. Just fabulous, great release, and one that I heartily recommend. Next up is another Imprint disc like I talked about, and this one is spine number 137 from 1964, and this is The Long Ships. And this is a Viking movie. Now, The Long Ships stars Richard Widmark, it stars Sidney Poitier, but it tells a story of a kind of roguish Norse Viking. I assume he's Norse. And he lives in a world where he thinks he can find a legendary golden bell. And the golden bell is such a massive treasure that many people are seeking it out. And he uses this idea that he can get the golden bell to gain favour or gain escape from various captivity, to get out of sticky situations, because like I say, he's a bit roguish, he's a bit off the wall, and he uses it to inspire and get people to follow him. Now, does this bell even bloody exist? There is a sense of the fantastic about this, so a bit Jason on the Argonautsy voyage into get treasure without necessarily the same level of animatronics. And then you have Sidney Poitier's character, who adds another bit of threat, I think is mostly what he's there for, in that he desperately seeks this bell for himself, for the Moorish people. Now, it was a bit of a different role for Poitier. It's alluded to in the extras in that he was very much a baddie of sorts, although he never really plays it maniacally. He plays it still in a Sidney Poitier way. But for all the things that The Long Ships maybe doesn't get right, in terms of not quite being as magnificent as Jason and the Argonauts and those kind of Harryhausen productions that were about at the time, it gets by with having a sort of flair to it and that adventure feel. And I do think it's fascinating that these kind of movies, which were seen probably as big budget at the time, are very much Saturday and Sunday afternoon fare. You can include Jason and the Argonauts, etc. in that sense, in that these were really state-of-the-art releases, whereas now these adventure movies are sit down and watch what's going on, even though some people get sliced and butchered as they're going the way along through it. I think really interesting. There's a couple of interviews with some of the cast and crew that are in this release as well, and then again we have a conversation with Kim Newman, all was good, and an audio commentary, and another conversation with Sheldon Hall on Long Ships, and these are all brand new releases done for this release. So you have the slipcase here, as you can see, and the rather more colourful artwork that's in the inside. So while it may seem like I and a couple of others are really pushing Imprint at the moment, I will say that even though they are incredibly expensive, incredibly, they are releasing releases that not many others are really dipping their toe into, or really seeing a niche or a market for. My second last one is, again, another recent-ish release from Eureka, and this is from their Masters of Cinema line. and haven't heard much about it, but this is Execution in Autumn by Li Shang. And this is a Taiwanese movie from 1972, I believe. Yes, it is 1972. And this is an interesting movie because it looks like a lot of the Kung Fu films that you'll have seen. In fact, the sets look very much like the early Zatoichi films, if you've seen any of those, where you have very much the soundstagey kind of look to it. You have a man who is being imprisoned for a murder or a set of murders. His life is maybe nearly forfeit, or it will be forfeit. He is the last in the line of his family. He dies, he has no heir in place, and the grandmother, who's pretty much his guardian, is determined that he will be set free, except that our protagonist here is very much an antagonist. He is a horrible man. He has been spoilt and had made excuses for his low life. He's very privileged, and you have this sort of full exploration of class insofar as he just believes he will get away with it because his grandmother, who is of wealth and of means, will get him off, and he has no remorse for the murders that he has committed. And that makes it a difficult watch. It makes it pretty tough to go through because you find it very hard to root for this man, and you're really kind of hoping that maybe he does get executed in some way, or that there's some more to it, and something more to it there certainly is. One of the really beautiful aspects, I think, of the filmmaking that's in here is the use actually of outside locations. So when you go away from the soundstage and you go outside, most of the shots that are outside here are, one, quite beautiful, and two, go to show the passing of time. So as this man's in captivity, or he is going through trying to find a resolution for himself, you get change from winter to autumn to summer to spring, etc. And all of the things that go along with the change of times. We have some absolutely wonderful, and I mean amazing performances in this. While I think it's not like the most incredible film I've ever seen, when I put it in context of it being like the precursor to the great Taiwanese cinema that was just about to happen, like Hao Xiaoxian, like Edward Yang, like Ang Lee, etc., that came and followed afterwards, this feels very much like a social consciousness kind of film, something that was trying to do, and it's actually talked a bit about by Tony Raines in the extras here, that a lot of the cinema that was being made around this time just wasn't going for this kind of level of discourse, wasn't going for this level of conversation. Is capital punishment, right or fair? Or in this case, did this man completely deserve it? Like I say, some absolutely wonderful performances, both male and female, and I think it's a release that sits very nicely in the Masters of Cinema range because it is different. There could be way more Taiwanese cinema in the collection itself. It's something that I think very much I got a lot out of. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed it for how different it was and how it tackled some of those subjects that I've seen obviously in other films in a way that maybe others hadn't. And like I say, there's an extra that's on the restoration about the before and afterwards of the restoration, but there's a 45-minute conversation with Tony Raines in it that you see 45 minutes filmed conversation, you think, God, that's long, isn't it? It just flew by. It was fascinating. It was full featured. I would watch it again because there was an awful lot in it. The booklets inside kind of covers some of the same ground again about genesis of Taiwanese cinema and the director Li Shang as well. I thought Execution in Autumn was great. I recommend it heartily to you. And the last one I'm going to talk about, well, this one is a Criterion release, and it's a sort of non-fiction film in that it recounts the true life telling of a horrific murder in a farmhouse in Kansas, and it's Truman Capote's In Cold Blood, directed by Richard Brooks. Now, this is a novel that was written by Truman Capote called In Cold Blood, and it tells the story of the murder of the Clutter family by two men. Now, the book I have started to read, I might do a little comparison between the two of them, movie to screen, although I can't imagine that many people have read the book recently, never mind have watched the film. But I think it's interesting because it doesn't matter whether you know what's going to happen, because it's quite clear from the outset that it is about a real life story and retelling of a murder and the motivations of both sides. Now, Truman Capote wanted this to be a non-fiction novel, and insofar as he was going to do like a dramatization or a novelization of what is a real life event in the mid-50s between two men that were released from jail and who went ahead and committed this murder, which seemed to be for no motive, for no gain, i.e. in cold blood. And the book explores the 6 people that are involved in this whole event, both before and afterwards. So you have the 2 men that committed it, and then the 4 people that were killed. And the book's really, really interesting for as far as I am into it at the moment, because it bounces back and forward between these bits, trying to tell you who these people were, what their motivations were, and kind of where they come from. It's really, really interesting film, but very noirish in how it's shot. Now, it doesn't have noirish themes. There's not a femme fatale in here necessarily, but the way that it's shot is very reminiscent of something like They Live by Night, which is a Nicholas Ray film. That kind of, the criminal aspect, the bit where they're trying to get inside the heads of these characters and see who they are. It has some incredible performances in it again. I mean, the 2 main ones, you'll recognise Scott Wilson from The Walking Dead in here in very much an earlier role. In Cold Blood, I think it's a really fantastic movie, and given I've talked about films that are all very good here, but I think this is terrific. I think this is really top level filmmaking. Richard Brooks, in the extras, it goes into a lot of detail about how much of a bully necessarily he was, or how much of a bully he was on set, and how hard he was to work for, but he got great performances out of people, and he pushed people's buttons a lot of different ways. The exploration of that within the extras, and then also of Truman Capote himself, who it just seems like such an interesting character. Really fascinating stuff, a really brilliant release, and a good example of why Criterion are still the label who, one, will pull real gems or real brilliant pieces of cinema and wrap them in these stunning releases for us to enjoy in modern and to be introduced in. And that is my watch list for this week. Hope you got something out of that. I hope that fits in with your watching plans. See if there's something there that you can get your teeth into. Like I say, some Imprint ones, which I know are very expensive, but if you can get like a streaming version of the film first, all well and good. If you like it, then you can obviously see if you like the disc. And then some more, more readily available releases here that you've seen. What have you seen yourself? What have you been watching, and what have you been up to? What has really grabbed your fancy? If you want to discuss those things, let me know in the comments. Otherwise, like the video, subscribe, and watch more watch list videos if you want. And I'll catch you again soon on the channel. Speak to you again soon.